A particular agile methodology I want to talk about is Scrum.
So this is a visual representation of Scrum, and you can see we have the product backlog and sprint planning. You take items into the sprint backlog, and then you have, they say, a 2 to 4 week sprint, and that actually is done with daily Scrum meetings, and then at the end you have a potentially shippable product increment, and then you go back to backlog grooming and sprint planning and so on. So you repeat all the steps essentially. Scrum has a lot of key terms that you should be aware of. The idea is that you have a product backlog, and that product backlog is a prioritized list of the functionality that the customer would like to have implemented. That backlog can be more or less granular, so you might have some elements of that backlog that might be, just very high level or very sketched out just in a rough way. And then you might have some things that become more clarified and more detailed. Then you have a sprint backlog, and the sprint is a short phase, a short development cycle. You actually repeat the cycle from user requirements all the way down to maintenance over and over. And they can be, often they're 2 weeks, but they can be shorter or longer than that. The team will then look at the product backlog together with the product owner being the customer proxy. And they will actually take the prioritized list and then agree on what they will take into the sprint. So that's a collaborative decision. So there is a whole lot of considerations that go into that. But then within the sprint, you have a burn down chart. So you will actually then track within the sprint the work that has been completed. That basically goes down to the actual things that you said you would. Within the Scrum team, you have the product owner, and as I said, that is a proxy for the customer, so stands in for them. Sometimes it's the customer themselves, and sometimes it is, or often it's a professional, someone who is actually trained to do this. And the product owner feeds the product backlog, so they actually put things into the product backlog that the customer needs. They also do the so-called grooming, which I will talk about in a moment. The Scrum Master is generally part of the Scrum team, and the Scrum Master works with the product owner to protect the team. So in the sense that the Scrum Master will make sure that Scrum is being followed properly, that the sprint is being respected. They also look at the team's effective work. So they look after the daily stand-up meetings, which I'll talk about in a moment. They look after the team agreements. They look after the documentation, all that. But they also try to facilitate issues that might arise in the development, so to help actually the rest of the team be very efficient and not having to worry too much about fixing problems. The Scrum Master will generally take care of that. And then you have the Scrum team, so it's self-organized and self-directed. I've already talked about the backlog, which the product owner takes care of. And that's just a list of features that the customer would like. And the backlog grooming is that you make sure that the items on the backlog are complete, so that everything is in there, but it also has the complete description of the requirements, and that it actually reflects the customer wishes and that is prioritized. And in Agile, in Scrum, this is an ongoing process. So the backlog grooming happens regularly. The product owner might be doing that on a daily basis or more than once a day, might be doing that just before a sprint. You have the sprint planning team, so that's where the team does that. They look at the upcoming sprint. That will generally happen at the end of one sprint. So you end a sprint with a review, and then you plan the next one. And then you collaborate with the product owner for that step and actually have them decide what you're going to do and what the issues might be. Often the sprint planning involves a more detailed step of estimation. This is an elaborative process. So you have a sprint review where the team and the product owner go over the work, and that is completed during the sprint, and you actually make sure that it actually is what the product owner needed or the customer, and whether it meets the definition of done. And that's also an opportunity to reflect on the team's working methods and the efficiency and effectiveness, and feed that information back into the sprint plannings, and also reflect on them whether they need to change the way they work or whether they have been underestimating things. So now they are becoming better at estimating and more effective overall on a very regular basis, right? Rather than having, if you think of a traditional project, you would have a post-mortem meeting after the project, or maybe after some milestones, but there might be months or years that pass before you have such a thing, and then you have that insight you will feed into a next project, right? But it might be a different team now that is doing the next project. So this way the teams become better quickly, or that's at least the idea behind that. And that happens in the sprint retrospective. So you have the sprint review is more of actually working with the product owner and looking at what has been done. And then you have the retrospective, but you actually look at how well is the team working. And then the final activity is this daily stand-up. What you are going over there is what have you done since the last stand-up, what will you do until the next one, and what problems do you have and anticipate. And this also gives the Scrum Master the opportunity to see what problems are approaching and whether the team is on track and whether they need any help that needs to be resolved. But the daily meeting is actually not meant to resolve the issues, but the Scrum Master will approach those issues.